Well, thank you so much for joining me, Chris. I would love to dive into a little bit about your background and how you actually ventured into starting Curvance.
Yeah, it's a long story. I originally was long ago. I actually messed around with like Bitcoin mining in like 2012 with some of my dorm mates, I guess you would call them in undergrad. And we were interested in Bitcoin and kind of messing around with it. We didn't really understand it super well at the time, and then it kind of like we lost interest in it, and there's this huge gap of time until around COVID. At that point, I had done my undergrad. I went into finance. I did my master's. My background in the normie world would be kind of what you'd call a quant or a data scientist. So I've built machine learning models, systematic trading algorithms for investments, analyzing trading data, and working with portfolio managers and traders and all different people trying to get the best, whether it be investment strategies for their clients or executing transactions, trades for their clients and such, or well, for the investment strategies for their clients. And around COVID time, I got interested in crypto again and started researching it. This a bit more focused on the smart contract side and on Ethereum. Still looking at the Bitcoin side, but more so I aligned more with Ethereum and like building programmable money and like kind of financial products. And I thought it was really interesting how like it felt to me. So funnily enough, I started off in engineering and I didn't really like it that much because it was it was very hardware driven and theoretical, at least at that time. And it wasn't as exciting as solving real problems. So then I went into finance and I was having a lot more fun with that. And then I looked at crypto and I was like, oh, I could like actually just solve problems. I could literally build technology. And to me, it was like kind of the sliding scale where this is now the most interesting thing to me. And because of that, I really just pivoted my whole career into crypto. And I started off as a security researcher, and then I eventually went into building Curvance. My co-founder and I decided that we were going to work together and build Curvance. The idea changed a lot, but we started building it around May of 2022. So around, this is the 22nd month now, which is crazy to think. So almost 2 years. And yeah, that's a little bit about the journey there, I guess.
Awesome. I love it. I also came from an engineering background. So I can also appreciate, I guess, going from like almost more like practical, like to more practical applications. I've also experienced something similar. And so when you started Curvance, what key problems were you looking to solve in the market?
Fundamentally, the way I kind of look at it is like I'd messed around with DeFi and I was interested looking at the DeFi summer stuff and everything through COVID. And I guess I didn't feel like there was a product that existed for what I wanted to do, which is like, I'm very analytical and I want to build strategies and stuff, and employ something. And there wasn't really any like single stop shop for that. It's like very disjointed right now. You could do all these things with like, automated market makers or borrowing against your assets, or there's obviously perpetual exchanges, there's options, there's all these things, but like they're kind of disjointed. You can't like really go to one place and do everything. So I was like, well, I want to do a strategy that like, is providing liquidity here. And like, I want to get the incentives that they're putting up, and I want to like be able to borrow against it and use it for other things. And I couldn't really do that. So, when my co-founder originally came up with the first idea, it was on top of Curve and Convex, which is like a singular ecosystem, single solution. We kept changing it over time and it kept growing in scale. So it became much more generalized and just like large scale, where it's now like it, in theory, can touch any asset, right? It's not just Curve or Convex. It's not just like one sector or one chain or whatever. It's really like everything. And I guess for me, it was really about building that product that I wanted to use personally. And I think that's also why, as we've been building this for 22 months, which is very atypical for a project, usually you'll see they'll raise some money and then they'll eventually come out with something like maybe a year later, 10 months later, 12 months later, 14 months later. But we didn't want to do that kind of like V1 that's an incremental improvement over what's currently out there. We wanted to have something more transformative that obviously isn't going to be perfect, right? Like I think that the Curvance of tomorrow, 20 years from now, 30 years from now will probably look different, right? Whether we're building it or someone else, kind of carries the torch. But I think for us, like we wanted to build something transformative that we wanted to use ourselves. And I think that's kept the team together over this 22-month period, all kind of working towards that vision.
I know that you're integrating a few different DeFi protocols. How do you evaluate the ones to integrate?
That's a really good question. So from my perspective, there's like really two areas. It's like, do we like the team? And like, well, there's three things actually. Do we like the team? Have they done like a lot of security review, right? So is there like some confidence that, we're not going to like suddenly start championing them and then they're going to blow up 2 weeks later or something, right? And then the third is obviously like, what does their adoption look like, right? Because obviously if we're putting in this effort, we need to make sure that there's going to be users and like, like usage of that support. So it's not like, I think it's a little bit different of approach. Usually people just kind of like, they'll sort everything by TVL, like how much money's in something, and then just be like, oh, well, we'll just support this then, right? We try to work much more closely with teams. I always say, there's a phrase I always say with this, but we're looking for what I would say like 1 + 1 = 3 situations. So what I mean by that is like situations that's like the sum of its parts is greater, right? So like by working with a team that we're collaborating with, like we're going to build something better and larger and bigger than if we just tried to do it all ourselves or they just tried to do it all themselves. So it's like, we don't have to be the best in every category. We don't have to build our own, decks. We don't have to build our own yield optimizers. We don't have to build our own these different things. We could work with those parties and they could win too. And I guess we're just looking for people like that. I think that's like, as I said, there's those three categories, but I think the biggest one is like whether the teams, are like a fit to culture, I guess, right? So it's like, do they think about these things the same way we do and want to see us win too, just like we want them to win?
Yeah, I think that's the good thing about, I guess, the Web3 ecosystem, that it is so collaborative. But I think a lot of people, or like, I've seen a lot of projects overlook the team aspect of things and then dive into collaboration, and then it doesn't end up working out.
Yeah.
So in terms of an end user, if I come onto your platform, and I'm not sure if you've launched yet.
Not yet. A few months. Probably
okay.
we're looking at around probably like May for the beta. I mean, it's still, we haven't really put any dates out there, but right now we have like Q2 written down. But yeah, it looks to be May, but we're going through we're going to start this big security audit push, like public security audit. We've been auditing since last August, but once we get out of this, we'll see kind of like what people find, like, vulnerability wise and stuff. And it's like, if it's really big, like a lot of things, then we might want to take a bit more time to just make sure that it's all safe. But if we get back and it's like kind of more what we expect, then we think it'll be around that kind of May-ish, like maybe beginning of May, middle of May, end of May, like in that realm.
Okay. So it's still soon.
Yeah.
So as an end user, when you do launch and I come into your platform, is there like almost predetermined strategies, or do I choose my own strategies? Like, how does that work from a user experience perspective?
There's kind of like an ethos, right? Like some people have like this idea of like, I want to build something permissionless that anyone could build anything. And then there's like the kind of very permissioned, we're only going to support this thing or these types of things. We're kind of in between in that, like, we can build an infinite number of things, and it could look like whatever people want, but we want to, as we were saying before, like kind of select a bit like who we think are good fits for us. And again, that's not just by TVL, it's not just by security, it's not just by the team, it's kind of this holistic view. So I would say that like initially is probably going to be more like handpicked, like, kind of a grab bag of like, these are the things you could do in terms of what's in the markets, right? But what people do with those markets is their decision, right? So people might do some like pair trade. Maybe they're liquid staking ETH and they put it into Curvance and they think that ETH is gonna, the Ethereum ecosystem is gonna outperform the Bitcoin ecosystem or something. In the main way they want to speculate that is that they think ETH as an asset is going to go up more than Bitcoin. So maybe they deposit that liquid staked ETH and then they borrow Bitcoin and then swap that into more ETH. So now they're like kind of long Bitcoin and they're long Ethereum and short Bitcoin. They could do that, right? Like that's not a strategy that we're kind of forcing them into. All we're saying is like, hey, in this market, you can deposit Ether or liquid staked Ether or whatever, and you could borrow wrap Bitcoin. So we're giving people the tools for those strategies, but how they use it is really up to them. We're just kind of guiding what tools are available there, such that like they're secure and there's confidence that nothing bad's going to happen to them.
And so, what exactly is the DAO responsible for?
We're working with the DAO in kind of delivering on the Curvance protocol. But the idea is like once we get past beta and the Curvance, the CVE token is live, people can basically join Curvance DAO, Curvance Collective, whatever people choose the name for it to be. That will govern like the decentralized smart contracts. So like if people want new markets or to go to new chains or to support new assets or whatever, right? Assets inside the Curvance DAO, they would have that full autonomy, right? So maybe they don't want to hire us again. Maybe they're like, that Chris guy sucks. We need to find someone else. So then they fire me and the rest of the team and they get like a new team, right? Like they could in theory do that. The stewards, I guess, the operators of the protocol, and kind of where it goes for the next, years.
Hopefully you won't get kicked out.
Yeah, hopefully they like me.
And how have you thought about designing like the governance systems?
It's tough because like, one of the biggest benefits we've had is we're building through the bear market. So we were able to see what's been successful and what hasn't been successful for people. So I'd like to think we took a lot of the good and threw out the bad. But I think DAOs right now are very much in their infancy. And, they're still, really getting their feet under themselves. I don't think there's any like perfect DAO right now anywhere close to it. But I think for us, the biggest thing is like making sure that there aren't big parties that kind of like where it becomes theater, where they can almost control the outcome. And then it's not really the choice of say the people, the holders, the users, but they've been able to, somehow manipulate the governance system such that they, largely or fully control it. So I think that's been like the big thing to avoid. And I think the other thing that's going to be really important is making sure that like you don't get kind of gunked up like a corporate system, right? Where suddenly like stuff that should maybe take a week because of, heavy checks and balances maybe is now like a 6-month endeavor because there's so many like submission periods and votes and revotes and addendums and whatever. I think it's like, I think to me the biggest thing is like crypto and blockchain as a landscape is changing so quickly. I view like crypto and AI as the two industries that are really like seeing explosive growth. And for us, it's really important that like the Curvance is able to be nimble and kind of roll with those changes and grow itself and change itself so that it doesn't fall behind. So that becomes pretty important when designing governance, that like it could still be like a well-oiled machine.
Yeah, I've contributed to DAOs where I feel like it's been probably the opposite of a DAO, where the
not
incentive
decentralized or
so
autonomous. Yeah, just an organization.
Yeah, like the founders owned, I think, like I want to say like 40% of the tokens or something like that. And then I found that there was almost like a lack of incentive. So it was like the DAO was building a product, and they've been going for like a few years, and there was almost like a lack of incentive to like, I guess, build quickly. So it kept getting pushed down. And then because like, I feel like the community didn't necessarily have a massive say in what direction things took, it just kept getting longed out. So I think that's a massive thing with DAOs.
Yeah, and I think you see that very heavily with like products that are being developed now, with maybe products that have been around for the last cycle, right? Like things that are still around from DeFi summer, where they may, at least from my perspective, be moving very slowly. Whereas I feel like we're able to really just keep building new functionality and relationships, and really just continually keep putting one foot in front of the other. Whereas they're kind of stuck in purgatory, it almost seems like. So I just hope we don't end up falling in that same trap.
I'm sure you won't. Sure
Just
you
hoping.
won't. So if we take a step back, how do you see the DeFi ecosystem evolving? And you mentioned like permissioned versus permissionless. Like at the moment, I think with the rise of like institutional DeFi or like tokenization, there's a lot of more permissioned DeFi happening. How do you see the two interacting?
That's a tough question. I think that nothing's ever like, I think everyone looks for like black and white solutions where it's like this or that. Like, and I know you're setting up a question there, right? So I'm not saying that you're doing this, but like, it's like, I don't think it's going to be just permissionless or just permission. I don't think it's going to be just decentralized stuff or just centralized stuff. I think when I think about that, I think of there's really two camps of people that I see broadly in like, just the world, right? In general, you have people that are like, okay, on one hand, crypto and blockchain is going to change the world and it's going to revolutionize money and it's going to, every bank's going to go out of business and everyone's going to be trading in little Bitcoins, and then the other side is like crypto's a scam and like it's all money laundering, and I don't think either of those are correct, right? Like truth lies somewhere in the middle there. So I think where we're going is that we're going to see kind of a merger of the two. As you saw this year, we got the Bitcoin ETF approved. I think you're going to see more institutional parties like traditional finance companies explore DeFi more broadly, first as a curiosity and then eventually with their own solutions, whether that be their own chains or however they end up. I mean, I'm not, Mr. BlackRock or, Franklin Templeton or whoever, like, I don't know what they're planning. But I think it would be a waste if they didn't integrate these things and explore it, because I think the big power of crypto more than anything is like the permissionless nature, like not having to do all these things yourself, right? Like we write the code and then it just can execute that code perfectly forever. You don't need like a person to hit certain buttons or to underwrite your loan or to do these things. So if you could just have a computer do that, I mean, from the business perspective, that's better for them, right? Because then they don't need to hire those people. I mean, that kind of sucks for the person that's doing the underwriting, but, I think you replace who's doing that work with, people that are now building this code and making it tamper-proof. So I think you're going to see, Web3 kind of bleed into some of these traditional finance companies, whether that's 2 years or 10 years, I don't really know. I think it's probably on the longer side. I think we're probably a bit further away than people may like, but I think it will happen. And permissionless versus permission, I think going like full permissionless, like anyone could do anything, I think it almost like gives people option paralysis where you're like, I could do anything. So it's like, well, what am I going to do then? And then you do nothing. So I think like having some permissionless stuff where it's like, hey, you decide what you want to do, but you also, have a DAO, or maybe it's a more formal corporation or whatever that kind of gives people the tools to make those decisions. I think that's like where it's kind of like part permissionless, part permissioned. I think that's like a good middle ground. But I don't necessarily know if it's like 75% or 25% or 50-50 or what that like kind of ideal is.
Yeah. No, I think it's almost like a spectrum. Like one of the projects I'm working on at the moment, they're tokenizing like HSBC fund. And obviously like when you get into more institutional capital, they require like the KYC processes just from a regulatory perspective. I think like permission DeFi provides more decentralized infrastructure than there currently is out there. But it does sway towards more the centralization like side of things. And like, I think the question that I have in my mind is like, with like the more retail DeFi space as we see it today, more on a regulatory perspective, what that looks like moving forward. Like in the UK, they've like launched super harsh like regulations around like DeFi and like advertisement, all these different things. And I know the US is kind of similar. So I think my question is also like, how does that more decentralized finance space like grow with regulation coming in?
I think it's like almost like a pendulum, right? Like right now it's very aggressive and it's swung very hard towards like this, as you said, like kind of pessimistic or just, harsh response to DeFi and to stable coins and such. But I think eventually the pendulum will come back and they'll kind of pull back, some of the heavier regulations and such, or at least give better clarity so that like companies can comply instead of just, kind of regulatory by enforcement, which I don't think is very fair. Because I mean, I personally would love if I could do stuff in the US and kind of register, and it's just literally not possible, even though they kind of pretend that it is.
I know. And so I guess over the next 12 months, what are your key priorities, and what are you like focused on at the moment?
Yeah, so first we gotta deliver, the Curvance protocol to the DAO. We're gonna be very soon here launching our testnet build. Obviously, running all these audits and stuff and making sure everything's safe and secure for people in parallel. And then we'll launch our beta. Beta is our main net, so that's like the product's live and everything. Just the token isn't live, and that'll run probably around 2 months. And then we'll go into the official launch, and that's when the token's live, the gauge system, like all the multi-chain rewards and stuff get turned on. And then it all, becomes more focused on like, okay, so now the core product's there. What does the DAO want to do with it, right? So is that expanding to additional chains? Is that building new markets? Is that new assets? Are we building like totally new products? Like that all gets spearheaded. Like the whole roadmap will be basically spearheaded by whatever the DAO wants. And I think that becomes pretty important because there's a lot you could do at Curvance, and I expect some things to be very successful and have a ton of usage, and then there might be other things that aren't as successful. So not everything's going to be 50-50, right? So I would imagine, that people are going to want to double down on the winners, right? So that means that, you're going to have certain things that are generating a lot of the, volume and the revenue and everything that comes with that. And there might be like heavier and heavier focus put on that. So that might be like liquid restaking stuff with the eigenlayer tech stack, or liquidity provisioning with AMMs or whatever, right? Like I'm not going to go too in the weeds on the technical, but whatever it ends up being, I think you just keep doubling down on that and keep hopefully moving the industry forward and building cool stuff.
Awesome. And last question, is the DAO currently active, and can members join the DAO, or what's like the criteria for that?
No, so I mean the main thing with that will be like once the CV token's live and we could put in place like kind of formal covenants and stuff. I don't know the best way to really orchestrate how like the DAO will look with that, in terms of like, are there kind of elected representatives where people can like, make decisions kind of like synthetics, or is it more generalized like, for example, like more conventional snapshot stuff where it's just everyone votes and, it's like, for example, mainly led by like the hired team. Do you have any thoughts on that? What do you think the best way to go with that is?
I don't have any right now, but I can put some together for you, because I've literally I'm gonna speak to Arbitrum around their
Oh,
DAO
nice.
governance system, and I know that they've been working incredibly hard on it. So after I have that conversation, I'll get back to you.
Yeah, we love the Arbitrum guys and girls. They're
Yeah,
a really great team. So Off-Chain
they
Labs
are.
been backing Curvance pretty heavily. We've been doing some work with the foundation, and once we're live, I'm sure we'll do some work DAO to DAO.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been a great conversation. Seeing how you guys are thinking around like how the DeFi ecosystem is moving is really interesting.
Appreciate that. Yeah.
Well, have a lovely day and I'll speak to you soon.
Sounds good.